abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us today at this Millennial Roundtable on Wednesday, February 6, 2019. So grateful. We've got quite a show for you today. Even just as is often the case on Wednesdays, I don't know what it is about Wednesdays that they're just as always late breaking news. We'll be talking about reaction from the President's State of the Union address last night, as well as even new breaking news that just came out of Virginia right now. The Attorney General, so the third in command in the line of succession, I should say, in Virginia, has just released a statement indicating that he, as well as the governor, has pictures of him in blackface. And so some of the implications from that. So if you're following along, you've got the governor a little over a week ago that photos were found out of him in blackface in 1984. And then following after that, you've got the Lieutenant Governor Fairfax that now has sexual allegations that have been leveled against him. And then the third in line of succession, the Attorney General, has got pictures of him in blackface from 1980. He released that as well. So we'll be talking about some of the implications behind that, and probably the bigger question that I'll be really interested in talking with you all as well as with our guests about is does a picture or something wrong and morally reprehensible that you did in the 80s, is that worthy of getting fired or resigning in 2019? And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we've got a little interesting, we'll be talking with Sean McDowell, who's obviously just a world-renowned cultural apologist later on during the first hour. And so grateful that we've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute here. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm doing well today.
So good to see you, as always. And then we've also got David Fraga, the self-made man, the man with the Midas touch here in Dallas. David, how are you?
Doing great.
Oh, so good. And so I'm going to take a little bit of liberty, especially since we have a largely Dallas audience right now, and I'd just like to share some news that I think some of our listeners might be aware of. There's an individual named Doc Thompson. He's a conservative radio host that I got to know over at The Blaze when I would appear on Glenn Beck's Think Tank show. And then also, once he left Glenn Beck and then transitioned over to a internet radio station called Mojo 5.0, News announced yesterday that Doc was he's just a good man. And so he was on a run and ended up dying on this run yesterday. And so he leaves behind 3 kids and a lovely wife. And my heart just breaks for him. The news was released earlier today. And just for some of our listeners, Doc is just this funny guy that has these great questions and just this wit about him. But one of the things that I was so appreciative of Doc is he was always just such an encouraging guy. You always knew that when he was in the room that the spirits would just be lifted, just because he had such an amenable personality and was just such a great man. I was grateful for that. And then you could not, but he always would have just these cutting questions that he just was so intelligent. I was reminded of conversations with him of just the idea that intelligence isn't measured by how much you know, but rather the questions that you can ask relative to any conversation. Doc was he was a good man, and his family, my heart goes out to his family, and then also for his just this loss that many of us are experiencing today, knowing that our friend is gone. But one of the beautiful things that we know about with Jesus is that to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And so my heart and prayers go out to Doc Thompson and his family, and so may he rest in peace as well. But So we've also got other news today, and so we're going to go ahead and jump into some of that news, and specifically what a lot of people are talking about today, which is the State of the Union. And from all intents and purposes of what we can tell from yesterday during the State of the Union address, the union is strong, Chelsey. The union is strong. And so President Trump, it was very interesting because he really did try to sound this theme of wanting to move towards unity and choosing greatness all throughout the speech. Your thoughts?
Very open-ended question.
Here you go.
You know, I think that Donald Trump actually does a great job with the State of the Union address.
Oh my goodness,
I mean,
yeah.
it was unifying in tone, and you know, but he's always strong on his policies and his issues. You know exactly what he's about when he's leaving, and as you would always expect from President Trump, he is self-aggrandizing. So, you know, I think it's easy to feel confident, leaving or being done listening that, oh, wow, everything's going to be okay, you know. Yeah. But I was interested in, I think it was Washington, maybe it's NBC, I'd have to look it up, did a poll and about 75% of viewers liked what they heard.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's very, very telling, especially going into the 2020 elections where everyone's going to be gearing up. Here pretty soon.
It's unbelievable that we're already gearing up towards this 2020 election. Mm-hmm. And David, when I was listening to the speech last night, I think one of the most interesting things I continued to hear, one, I just never thought I would hear a joint session of Congress sing "Happy Birthday," so to hear that was one thing. I think another thing I was not expecting to hear. It's just this. There was now. Granted, I know certain media entities tried to point out the areas where he was trying to differentiate himself, put up principles that were from his agenda. But one of the things that you continued to hear was this desire for unity from President Trump, and really did specify on certain issues as well, relative to HIV and combating HIV and AIDS epidemic, to criminal justice reform. There was just a couple of issues that he really was trying to sound that unifying theme. So what were your takes? What were some of your takes that you took from it last night?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get a chance to see it last night, but I saw it this morning, and I thought it was really good. I was actually really encouraged to see that his attempts to try to bring unity in some aspects, but he was just standing firm in a lot of his policies, right? I think it's really cool how he was just calling out, like, even the investigations. I feel like this past year was like crazy. There's always an investigation every single day, every single other day kind of deal on someone, no matter what party they're from. So I think that's really cool because he said that's so divisive, you know?
Yeah, get ready, because I think there was there's definitely going to be the investigative tone over the next 2 years to our Congress.
You know, my thought on it will be it's going to eventually like lose its luster for the American people if it hasn't already. There's only so much the world is on fire that the news can say before people just don't believe it anymore. And I think, you know, Democrats are just the hot mess express right now. But Donald Trump, I really did like his statement about, you know, a win is not a victory for our party, but it's a victory for really all Americans. And whether it's mere rhetoric or not, I really do like that unifying tone, and think that's a tone that I hope and wish our country would take on as a whole.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see if this tone continues on, right? So I thought that was one of the things that I think both parties, the desire that was shared among both entities, would be the desire for unity. And so Stacey Abrams, who gave the Democratic response, she was the individual that ran for governor in Georgia, ended up losing to Brian Kemp, but she gave the Democratic response. And one of the things that she said that really differentiated her, but also sounded something very similar, was the desire for unity. But her desire for unity was based on certain ideals. And so it's much larger in picture, whereas President Trump offered particular issues that he wanted to move towards unity on. And so there was the similar desire for unity, but a different way to be able to get there. And so in a shocking twist, they disagreed a little bit. And so we're going to have to take a break right now. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about the State of the Union. Specifically, I want us to hone in on some of what the immigration pieces that he was talking about, and what I would consider one of the strongest stances and statements for life that's ever been uttered from the State of the Union. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the hot ideas in the progressive world is the Green New Deal. It's a term reminiscent of FDR's New Deal of the 1930s, but is even bolder in its approach. For the next year or so, we will hear Democratic candidates talk about it and perhaps even include it in the 2020 Democratic platform. If people take a moment to sit down and read it, they would reject it, but since most of us don't have the time, let me summarize 2 key points. First, the plan would cut military spending by at least half and withdraw U.S. troops from overseas. Let me give you the numbers. We have 1.3 million active duty troops, another 865,000 reserves, and another 680,000 civilian employees. Cutting spending by at least half would put at least 1 million military personnel out of work. And also, do we really think withdrawing troops from South Korea or the Middle East is a good idea? Second, the plan would require the eventual elimination of all fossil fuels and even nuclear power. Natural gas produces 32% of America's energy. Oil and liquid natural gas produces an additional 28%. Coal provides nearly 18%, and nuclear power produces another 10%. In about a decade, we're supposed to replace 88% of America's current energy sources. Americans might also want to examine the history of the New Deal. Jonah Goldberg reminds us that FDR campaigned to fight the Great Depression with industrial policies and a militarized workforce. The New Deal then, and certainly the Green New Deal now, would have to increase government power over people and their liberties. Some politicians might like the sound of a Green New Deal, but I can assure you that you wouldn't like what these policies would do to you and your lifestyle. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us today. And we have been talking a little bit about the State of the Union, some of the reaction that came from it, and then also some of the things that we can rally around. So one of the things that I was so very interested in, so you go to a State of the Union address, there's the pomp, there's the circumstance that's happening.
I love it, by the way.
Do you really?
I love it. Yeah. Oh, all you cynical people are like, oh, it's not even an official event. It's just tradition. But I'm an Aggie, so
of course,
Aggies love their ridiculous, empty traditions. And the more pomp and circumstance, the better. And I just love the State of the Union. I feel so patriotic, no matter even who the president is.
Okay. So
America the
so
beautiful.
You can differentiate on that. I mean, we can go back to history and say Thomas Jefferson just sent his over in a written address. He didn't necessarily deliver it before Congress. It was really Eisenhower that was very much the pomp man that wanted to make a big spectacle of it. But that's neither here nor there. We won't talk about history and going back to historical president, but that's neither here nor there. One of the things that I think is always characteristic of it is just the Democrats would clap. Whoever was the sitting president, his party is just cheerleaders during that entire time. And then the oppositional party is just pretty much fuddy-duddies. They're sticks in the mud when it comes to it. I know that. But last night, it was so shocking to see how Democrats would not even get up and cheer for like job numbers, for example. Like it was unbelievable how intransigent they were at that particular point.
Intransigent.
I feel good about that.
That's me like I'm a 5-year-old.
Can I say I got my notifications that are set right now for dictionary.com and thesaurus.com, so I'm learning new words along the way. But did you?
We saw it last year too. Though I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
No, like they will have his head on a platter if they could. I mean, this is the party that said go to restaurants and harass public service leaders in our country at their own homes. I mean, no, they weren't clapping for the president.
Yeah. Have we gotten to that point now, David? Have we gotten to the point where we can't even sell it? Like, and again, I know that these are outlier situations because they're 500 plus elected officials, but have we gotten to a point now where they can't even celebrate things that apply not just on the Democratic side, but also on the Republican side, crossing party bounds?
Well, I think like a lot of them are still trying to celebrate them, but they're just being sarcastic with it.
Okay.
You know, I think I saw an article earlier today just talking about how even like Nancy Pelosi was just sarcastic applauding and things like that.
That picture that he's talking about, I'll tweet it out or I'll put it on Facebook on our page. There is a picture of Nancy Pelosi standing up and clapping for the president, which is, again, it's everyone claps and applauses and stands up during this address. But there's one picture where she just has this smug look. And again,
closer,
I understand, like you should see some of the screenshots of me. It's atrocious, some of the screenshots, because my face is so expressive. But there's this one picture where she has her hands all the way out and directed right towards him, and she's like clapping, and she's got this smug little look on her face. And it's just very, very clear to anyone that was watching last night that we are a very greatly, significantly divided country right now.
We are mean girls status level, cliquey. I mean, that's what it is. It's high school, the way they're acting.
Yeah.
There was something he said that did elicit applause from both sides of the aisle, and that was the increase in women's jobs last year by 58%. Both sides of the aisle actually did really like that, which rightfully so. An increase in jobs is a win for really everyone.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I think definitely something that we can all celebrate. It was one of the most women that was ever in Congress to the point.
That's true.
And you saw there's this massive conglomerate of women that were wearing white last night in honor of, I think, the women's suffragist movement. I think that was the shtick.
I think I missed why.
And so I think that was pretty interesting. But then there was also some areas in which we can really, especially from a Christian standpoint, we can really take heart in. And one of those issues was the abortion issue. Like I said before the break, that this is, in my remembrance, and again, not just my remembrance of when I was alive, because that was a short time, but also just stretching back into U.S. history, I can't remember seeing or hearing a more clear stance on the abortion issue than what was uttered last night. And so we're going to let you hear that, and we're going to roll the clip right now.
There could be no greater contrast to the beautiful image of a mother holding her infant child than the chilling displays our nation saw in recent days. Lawmakers in New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb moments from birth. These are living, feeling, beautiful babies who will never get the chance to share their love and their dreams with the world. And then we had the case of the governor of Virginia, where he stated he would execute a baby after birth. To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in a mother's womb. Let us work together to build a culture that cherishes innocent life. And let us reaffirm a fundamental truth. All children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God.
Unreal.
Incredible.
Just a straight statement on this, and especially in light of the conversations that have been happening just over the past 2 weeks. So you go back 2 weeks ago, you have New York State Governor Cuomo lighting up the Empire State Building pink in honor of women's choice, and they're passing an abortion law that allows for third trimester abortions, which is just morally atrocious, reprehensible. And then you transition over to what was happening last week with Governor Northam because of Delegate Tran, just a delegate in the Virginia House of Assemblies. And you have this bill that's put forward that very much is like the New York bill that eases some of the restrictions on abortion. And Governor Northam just last week in a radio interview describing in vivid detail about what would happen to this child after it would survive the abortion, was born, it would be cleaned, resuscitated, and then there would be doctors to be able to consult with the mother as to what to do with the child. Just a very gruesome. So you have that, and then in stark contrast to what happened over the past 2 weeks, then you have the President of the United States that comes forward and offers a very clear understanding, not only from the biblical perspective relative to the life issue being made in the image of God, but then also from the legal perspective of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Chelsey, I can't remember a more clear explanation of the life issue than what happened last night.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible that that our president, a Republican president, who by traditional conservative standards and values, when he was elected, we were very uncertain as to how really decisive he would be on our issues. And the truth is, he's more pro-life than any Republican we've ever had elected. Yeah. Right. I think Vice President Mike Pence, I shouldn't just call him old Mike. Vice President Pence had an incredible op-ed come out last week where he talked about the steps that the administration has taken, that this is not just rhetoric that we're hearing out of the president, but his administration has leaps and bounds worked on the pro-life issues and repealing certain regulations that aren't pro-life and pulling out of international treaties with countries who are still strong on abortion issues. There's a lot that this administration is actually doing and not just saying. And I really think that we are on the cusp of maybe a complete change in the pro-life movement, like a solid victory with our Supreme Court having the 5 conservative bloc that it has, with his push towards Congress. I really think that history could be made on this issue, which is enough for me to support our president.
It's crazy because, as Chelsey alluded to, David, this was a president that many individuals on the conservative side had a number of questions about, especially regarding the 17 other candidates that were in the field.
I'll be the first to admit that I was skeptical.
I had a ton of questions.
I eat my words now. Formally.
Only 2 years later. Okay, so David, this is something that, again, I know there's a lot of individuals that can think of a lot of reasons to be able to criticize President Trump. But on this issue, it's hard to criticize this president on how clear he's been.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been so clear. And, people are just like, man, where does he stand? You know exactly where he stands. Yeah. You can't question that at all. Yeah.
So no one's ever, I don't think anyone's ever said about President Trump, I wonder what he's thinking. Because more often than not, I'm pretty sure he's either tweeted something that he's thinking or he said what he's thinking.
I sometimes wonder what he's doing.
But we've got to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more specifically during the State of the Union address to talk about immigration. But we'll be back right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us, and so thankful that we have got two individuals in studio that are going to be people that continue to poke and prod me and make me better. We've got, of course, Chelsey Youman. I almost said somebody else. Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We were talking about the Fox News anchor just now, or the former Fox News anchor just now, and so I almost said her name instead of your name. And so we've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, who I'd much prefer to the Fox anchor that we were just talking about. Can we just go ahead and be clear? And then we've also got David Fraga here in Dallas, the man with the Midas touch. So grateful that they've decided to join me today at the Millennial Roundtable. And so we have been talking about President Trump, the State of the Union address. And during this past segment, we were talking about how clear a stance that he gave on the abortion issue, which, again, I think there was a lot of individuals that were very hesitant coming into 2016 about the abortion issue. Just thought, well, will President Trump be our guy on this? After all, he did donate. There was money that was given. He was more pro-choice than he was pro-life before he ran for president. But he is mystified. He is surprised and unexpectedly been probably one of the strong. He is one of the strongest that I can think of in recent history, Chelsey, pro-life presidents that we've had.
Absolutely. I mean, it's definitive what his stance is. There's it's no holds bar with him, really, on any policy he has. Yeah. So I respect it, of course, and especially as it relates to the pro-life issue. If it was that issue alone, I think it would be worth supporting him because of all of the strides he's taking and his administration is taking on that front.
Yeah. But then also there's also something else that he has decided to double down on. And this has been in the news, obviously, and been something that we've all been talking about. And even the merits of it is the immigration issue. And so President Trump spent a large part of his speech last night, or his address rather, last night on the State of the Union, talking about the immigration issue. And so let's go back. Let's continue rolling. We've got the first clip. He's going to talk about, addresses the issue of immigration, reminding the nation that this is issue and this is the reason why it was the government shut down about a month ago.
Now, Republicans and Democrats must join forces again to confront an urgent national crisis. Congress has 10 days left to pass a bill that will fund our government, protect our homeland, and secure our very dangerous southern border. Now is the time for Congress to show the world that America is committed to ending illegal immigration and putting the ruthless coyotes, cartels, drug dealers, and human traffickers out of business.
It was a pretty strong line that President Trump offered. Again, Chelsey, we know the government shutdown happened at the end of right before Christmas this past year, and now it's stretched over 35 days into the new year, and now we find ourselves at a place where it is potentially going to shut down again. Nothing like a post-Valentine's Day celebration, quite like the government shutdown. And so now we know that this issue is going to be the center point as to which if we can keep the government open or keep it shut down. And so he's reminding us yet again of just the importance of the immigration wall in those remarks.
And again, the shocking thing to me was that 74% of the country agreed with his stance on immigration. Yeah. And I think, it is a crisis, and it's something that, even the Democrats used to acknowledge was a crisis, and now they're so polarized they won't even say that. But that it has to be addressed. Now, how we address it is where there's gray area and debate. I actually think the fact that he isn't declaring a national state of emergency, which I really expected him to do last night.
Yeah. He kind of let up with it, though.
I think he's showing restraint because I think Trump we would have seen a year ago operated much less like a separation of powers, reserved authority president, and more like a CEO. And he has the authority and power to declare a state of emergency, and he's showing restraint in doing that. So I'm impressed with that, and that he's hopefully going to try to find a way to actually get it done through Congress and the right mechanisms.
Okay, so I'm going to put it to you straight, David, right now. Will he declare, the prediction isn't will he declare a national emergency. Talk to us a little bit about this idea of national emergency. And just to fill in our listeners a little bit, there's been the ongoing kind of looming in the background threat that President Trump will issue a national emergency at the border. And when he issues a national emergency, it will allow him to reappropriate certain funds from various other budget line items in order to be able to fund the wall, or parts of a wall, rather, I should say, to be more accurate, along the border right now. And so it's around $5.7 billion he's asked for right now. Democrats were willing to go upwards of a little over $2 billion earlier in October and November. President Trump didn't take them up on their offer. He wanted the whole 5.7, and now Democrats have doubled down and said that they are not going to give him one dime for a wall, calling it to a certain degree even a moral issue, is what Nancy Pelosi said. Man. So elaborate for us, help us to understand the national emergency. Is it a national emergency that's happening down there? Would it be within the president's means to be, and his authority to be able to issue a national emergency and reappropriate funds for the building of a wall? Help us to understand this.
Yeah. So actually, I really enjoyed the part where he's talking about El Paso, how it used to be, the most dangerous city because of the border and things like that. But then he said they started putting some reinforcements and things like that. And then he also talked about how he sent 3,000 other troops down there, and just talking about how there's such a need. And then he started talking about just the gangs coming in and just fueling so many deaths and even bringing people into the audience and things like that. But all that being said, I think he's wanting to not quite go there yet. Yeah. Just because that might be like his last card to play, in my opinion.
Can he? Should he?
I'm not sure if he can, honestly.
Okay.
Should he? I mean, he's Trump. I think he does a lot of things that we're like questioning. Like, should he actually do this?
In your opinion, should he?
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think he should. Honestly.
Rationale as to why?
Because he's obviously making leeway. Like, he's making progress. Okay. There's no need to just stay.
Okay. Chelsey?
That's a great answer.
Same question, different response. Maybe, hopefully.
I'm going to give the lawyer response.
Okay.
I truly could not say whether he should or should not until I look at legally what a national emergency technically is, and see if we're meeting that standard. And if we are, definitely. And if not, it would maybe be a bridge too far. But I have to look at the standards, and I don't know. And maybe I'll look up over the break, and then I'll come back.
Yeah. So based on the research that I've done scant research, and I am not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination. I know how to read a bill, but sometimes it's a little, and I know how to read some of the policies and bylaws that are already in place as well. And based on what I've read, I just don't know if it constitutes a national emergency. I think sometimes we can fall into the dichotomy of, so for example, if I'm listening to me right now, I say I don't think it constitutes a national emergency. Someone might be listening and saying, well, this Pitts guy's a flaming liberal right now, doesn't want us to build a wall, just wants all these people to come over. Well, and that's not I don't want you to hear that. I think that there's a need for a wall. I think the research is very clear. I think boots on the ground have clearly shown that there's a need for a wall in certain segments that would be very effective, which I think is a good thing. And just to be able to help out, like we're helping out our troops overseas. We want to help out some of the border agents that are down there as well. So I think that there is a need for that. But I don't know. I am always hesitant, especially from my ideological persuasion. I'm always hesitant towards an executive branch that continues to enlarge and expand their powers. And so I'm worrisome from the 18th century, my 18th century mind, as to I believe it to be true that Congress is the one that appropriates that money, and I would be very hesitant to see a president reappropriate money that's already been put into use been assigned a particular use. I'm very hesitant for the precedent that sets, because then I think through, Chelsey, 2 steps down the road, what keeps a Democrat from saying that global warming or climate change is a national emergency, therefore we must institute X, Y, and Z. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely,
and then to be able,
absolutely.
Especially when we just had this new release of this the Green New Deal that's taking place, that just I have disagreements about the level of reaction relative to climate change right now, and I would be very hesitant for a president to be able to reappropriate money, knowing that a Republican's not always going to be in office.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, but it comes down to the law and the books and the standards. Yeah. And as commander-in-chief, he does have a right to, that is his sole obligation in the Constitution, really, is to protect protect our nation. And so depending on if he meets the standards or not, that's really the question.
Yeah. And so we would love to hear from you. So we're going to have to take a break, but you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. What do you think about the border wall specifically? Should President Trump reappropriate funds and when he constitutes a national emergency in order that we might be able to build a wall? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? We'd love to hear from you. You can also go on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. So whether that's your comment or question or opinion, or whether it's just another thing that you want to talk about. But we've got to take a break right now. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about this immigration thing that President Trump proposed in the State of the Union address yesterday. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You may often hear me say that the First Amendment requires government agencies to be neutral towards private religious speech. But what does that mean? Some take the position that when the speech of a private person or organization enters the public forum, the government must ensure that all speech within such a forum be neutral, censored, and scrubbed of any religious content. But that is not neutrality, and when a government does that, it violates the First Amendment. Neutrality actually means that the government will neither favor nor disfavor particular viewpoints expressed in speech. It means that the government will not promote a particular point of view nor censor it. It means that government respects the speech of its citizens, allowing the exchange of ideas through divergent viewpoints, even those viewpoints with which those sitting in government may disagree. So if a school district has a flyer distribution program that allows local organizations to distribute information to the parents of its students, it is not required to make sure those flyers present a neutral message. The school board wouldn't be neutral if it did. As the Supreme Court has repeatedly held, quote, speech discussing otherwise permissible subjects cannot be excluded from a limited public forum on the ground that the subject is discussed from a religious viewpoint, unquote. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We've been talking about the State of the Union address, specifically President Trump and the immigration issue last night. He didn't declare a national emergency relative to the immigration issue and the border wall. That appears to be, again, that decisive issue that whether the government shuts down yet again on February 15th or whether it stays open, if he gets the $5.7 billion he wants for funding. And so we're really moving towards this idea of does it constitute a national emergency that he can declare at the border in order to reappropriate funds from other budgetary measures in order to be able to fund this wall. And so he didn't declare it last night. He mentioned it, and one of the ways that he was mentioning it, but he was also building, you could tell, a subliminal case for it as well. And so we've got another clip that we want to air for you, talking about the issue of the immigrant caravans that continue to be there. We're going to roll that.
As we speak, large, organized caravans are on the march to the United States. We have just heard that Mexican cities, in order to remove the illegal immigrants from their communities, are getting trucks and buses to bring them up to our country in areas where there is little border protection. I have ordered another 3,750 troops to our southern border to prepare for this tremendous onslaught. This is a moral issue. The lawless state of our southern border is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of all America. We have a moral duty to create an immigration system that protects the lives and jobs of our citizens. This includes our obligation to the millions of immigrants living here today who followed the rules and respected our laws. Legal immigrants enrich our nation and strengthen our society in countless ways.
And there it is. He is, again, you can tell that he's alluding to, he's trying to build up, and you even see it with some of the language that he utilized relative to the safety and then also the moral imperative and then the health. There's a law dictionary indicates that a national emergency is, quote, a situation beyond the ordinary which threatens the health and safety of citizens and which cannot be properly addressed by the use of other laws. And so we're continuing to see this case that's being built. And Chelsey, there's a part of it that just discourages me to a certain degree, but there's also a part of it that, again, we're starting to see some of these breadcrumbs as to what's going to be happening in the coming weeks relative to the government shutdown and the border wall and the funding, et cetera, et cetera. No, so well, no. I just wonder. No, it's not even a question. I just want your thoughts as to. Again, because it goes back to my mentality. Like I don't think it's a national emergency. I don't think it is.
So we did some very quick, sloppy legal research over the break, and I did, look into it a little bit more. And you're right. I mean, on first blush, if he can use other means to accomplish the same thing, then it appears that he can't declare a state. Also, the president does not have the power of the purse. That is exclusively constitutionally Congress's job. So he can't reallocate funds from Congress without congressional approval unless it's military funds as commander in chief. So he could presumably declare a state of emergency, which there's a question too, because, for it to be a real state of emergency, there's a sense of imminence. It needs to be an immediate state of emergency because Congress doesn't have time to act. And so I don't know that we're looking at that there, but let's say he declares one and then reallocates or diverts military funds from the Army Corps of Engineers would be the ones who would have to build the wall. I think it could still be constitutionally challenged, and he would have to show that this is a military exercise. Depending on the judge, the pick of the draw, that could be upheld or not. So really, it is a question. I think it's enough of a question that he's obviously hesitant to act. And he'd obviously prefer to have Congress pass it.
Obviously. If you're him, you've made it this far. Do you accept something less than $5.7 billion? Or is it even possible to accept anything less after $5.7 billion after everything that has already been, the country's been put through right now?
I don't have an answer to that. I just know that historically it's been done 58 times since 1976.
Okay.
That's significant.
I again, count me hesitant. Call me old-fashioned. I'd like to see Congress actually do this, and so I'd like for there to be some.
Well, there's such a gridlock now.
But I don't think there. Again, I know that there's been a gridlock, but again, we've always had gridlock in Congress. There's never been a time in which there hasn't been some type of gridlock, and so I just think that we have. What I am concerned about, and David, maybe you can speak to this, is just the highly divisiveness that the divisiveness that exists within the halls of Congress right now. That's very discouraging to me. And you see, and I don't know if it's just lip service, but you see both sides try to appeal towards unity, not consensus, but unity. President Trump identified issues last night. The Democratic response, Stacey Abrams, identified ideals. And so you have issues and ideals. Is it not possible for us to come together on a solution that maybe both sides are unsatisfied with? And so that raises the question, especially from the conservative side, could President Trump accept something that's less than $5.7 billion, or is that just completely off the table?
I think he's always trying to bring new solutions to the table, but at the same time, if he's going to move from this stance, then what's to say he's not going to move from other stances?
Yeah, I
think even his party's definitely backing him on this, but I don't have the perfect answer for this, obviously. But what I can say is, he's a smart guy, he's a business guy, and so I wouldn't, I would think that he would have other thoughts about this. But the thing is, if he's not focused on at least one of them, the most effective one that he believes and pushes for that, then who's to say then there's going to be more division to support that decision?
Chelsey, just count me skeptical. I just think I think the president. I want to see border funding. Obviously, I want to see this wall funding that goes into play. Just because, again, especially my perspective, I'm pretty involved in the human trafficking piece here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And knowing that is a key component that's happening right now.
The I-35 corridor.
It's just it's just horrendous what's happening right there, down there right now, especially relative to children and minors. And so I want to see law and order restored on our border. And it's not even a Mexico thing. It's more southern. It's more South America. So you've got it's Guatemala, it's Colombia right now, and then the amount of drugs that are flowing through there, upwards of $47 billion of drugs are transferred across the border last year. And so I'm cognizant of that, but I'm just really skeptical of a president that's willing to reallocate funds. And because even though it's dire down there, I don't know if it's a national emergency. I think the greater emergency. No, it's not an emergency. It's not even an easy thing to say.
Well, what would constitute an emergency then? I mean, if the statistics you just mentioned.
Here's the thing. Like, even to go by this, which cannot be properly addressed by the use of other law. Like, there's time to be able to do this. And so there's a gravity to the situation that's happening right now, but we have time. Like, we have bounds of time right now to be able to address this issue. It was addressed 4 months ago when the president turned it down. Like, I think we've got to get to a point where no party is going to be satisfied right now, because we're in a mixed bag right now. Yeah,
right. Congress. It is the onus is on Congress, which is what is frustrating because really we should be applying pressure to Congress to do its job and not be paralyzed in fear, which we see so often. But I am the first to say that I am sympathetic in a lot of ways to refugee status immigrants and those seeking asylum, because there are laws on the books that enable people to come to our country lawfully and flee terrible circumstances. And I wish those were applied more even-handedly.
Yeah, there's just so much opportunity. Oh, and we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to have Sean McDowell is going to be joining us as well. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you decided to join us today on this Wednesday, February 6, 2019 day. During the first hour, we were talking a little bit about the State of the Union address that President Trump gave last night, declaring the State of the Union very strong. And so we'll get to that a little bit later on during the hour. But I'm joined here in studio with Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm doing well.
So very good, to as always, to have you here. And then over the phone, we've got a special guest. We've got Sean McDowell is joining us over the phone today. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So grateful that you're here today. You're going to be talking with us a little bit about this Generation Z thing. So tell us a little bit, give us some dynamics, because, I mean, this is the Millennial Roundtable. And so, you know, millennials, we love it to be about us. Specifically, I love it to be about me, if I'm just completely honest. And so the selfie-taking, Snapchatting, Uber-riding guy, I just want it to be all about me. But I'm willing to concede for at least 30 minutes to help us better understand this Generation Z thing.
Well, I appreciate you conceding to this next generation that's coming up. I'm a Gen Xer, so I just got lost in the
Exactly. Gen what? I don't even know.
Totally. Well, there's a lot of ways we could talk about Gen Z. We could talk about how diverse this generation is. It's the last generation that will be majority white. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is they feel good about this. By the way, Gen Zers are those probably like elementary through college age, roughly, even though demographers differ over exactly how they gauge it. But probably the elephant in the room, when you think about Gen Z, is just that they are technological, they're digital natives. So, you know, your generation, depending on how old you are and where you fit within it, you're probably a digital immigrant. You learned to use technology, at least mobile smartphones, as you were growing up. That's true for most millennials. Mm-hmm. But Gen Zers were swiping tablets and smartphones before many of them could even read. So this has shaped the way they think about relationships. It's shaped their patience and attention span. It's shaped the way they process information. It's really shaped their worldview. So I think the key lens to understanding Gen Z is through their use of digital technology.
That's fascinating. Okay, so help us understand, so when you say they're digital natives, these are individuals, again, they didn't grow up. So, for example, for me, I grew up thinking, okay, I'm going to go play Oregon Trail, but Oregon Trail wasn't connected to the internet. And then I'm going to have number munchers. And Carmen Sandiego, I'm going to search to and fro for. So when you say digital natives, these are individuals that have always been immersed in the internet. And they've always been immersed. They've always had the handheld device that's given them the world at their fingertips. Has there been some, because, you know, there's certain, some of our listening audience is probably aware there's been some great advantages to having that kind of technology that's available to us. But there's also some detriments as well. Share a little bit about that.
Well, I'm glad you said there's positives and negatives. One thing I do when I speak on Gen Z is I ask audiences to give me individual words that describe this generation. And usually the older the audience is, the more negative they are.
That surprises no one.
You know?
Yeah.
Right, like entitled and selfish and on. And then after everyone shouts out their words, I say, were your words positive or negative? And I pause and I say, because the lens through which you see this generation will shape how you relate to them.
So true.
There has always been concern about the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
There's always been concern. This is nothing new. There's positive in Gen Z and there's negatives. So parents, teachers, pastors of every generation, we need to choose to see the positive in this generation so we can relate to them appropriately. Now, back to your question about digital natives. I was on a plane not long ago, and I saw this lady, I don't know, 75 or 80, reading a book on a tablet. And I tweeted out something like, wow, the digital revolution is here. Even, grandmas are comfortable using digital technology to read a book. And this guy commented back, he said, no, the digital revolution will only be here when you and your generation are gone and nobody even notices that. And I thought, that guy is totally right. You see, I notice and you notice that there's a difference between mobile technology and accessibility being possible every moment. This generation doesn't. It's the air they breathe, the water they swim in, so to speak. They don't have any memory or experience differently. So one way it shapes this generation is, think about this. Our generation, and I mean both of our generations, probably learned how to communicate online. This is a generation where online communication is natural, and they have to learn how to communicate offline.
Wow.
That's a radical difference we miss. And if I could throw one more thing out there, we could talk positive or negatives, but there's a book by Jean Twenge from San Diego State, a sociologist, and it's called iGen. And she says there is a hockey stick increase in loneliness, depression, and suicidality right around the time Gen Zers started kind of getting smartphones around junior high. So one thing technology has brought, I'm not saying it's bad, but ironically, we're more connected digitally, but we're less connected face-to-face in meaningful relationships than ever before, and it has profound implications for Gen Z, some of which consider themselves the loneliest generation.
Yeah, the loneliness piece is something that's just so prevalent right now. I think even Gene's article in The Atlantic, Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation, talking about the clear links between the more you look at a screen among the Gen Z, the less likely you are to be happy. These individuals that are largely, and I think we've seen memes of this, Chelsey. I think it's always so interesting. I'm sure you've seen some of these pictures. I guess you would just call them 21st century cartoons, as we'll say memes are. So these memes are, given the opportunity to go hang out or stay back home, there's more and more, it seems, Gen Zers that are wanting to stay at home rather than go out and be among their friends. I think that was one of the interesting pieces that I was captivated by in Dr. Tween's article in The Atlantic. It indicated that 84% in 2000 of high school seniors went on a date during their senior year. That number was around 54 to 56% in 2015 among this Gen Z. Just individuals that are largely not going out with their friends, but being choosing instead to stay at home. Just very fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. But, I still feel that there is a high social dynamic among them. They still long to have friends and they still do sports. They still have extracurriculars and activities and camps that force them to interact. It's just that hopefully, they're learning that social interactive component, which is so important to life outside of technology. Yeah. And I think, even my neighbor, and this is just a personal story, but even my neighbor, she's a teacher, was saying that my generation, millennials who are young parents like me, have learned from this generation that's so addicted and so antisocial in many ways, and are going the other direction and taking away a lot of technology and not allowing their younger ones to have it, now that we've really seen that the jury's kind of out. And it sounds like it's been a kind of a sad social experiment on the next generation, really.
Yeah. And so we've got to go to a break right now, but when we come back, we'll still have Sean McDowell on the phone, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this iGen, this Gen Z that's coming up right now, that are in college right now, but then also stretch all the way back to elementary school. If you have a question or comment, you can call in 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212, and we'll be back, though, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the hot ideas in the progressive world is the Green New Deal.
It's a term reminiscent of FDR's New Deal of the 1930s, but is even bolder in its approach. For the next year or so, we will hear Democratic candidates talk about it and perhaps even include it in the 2020 Democratic platform. If people take a moment to sit down and read it, they would reject it, but since most of us don't have the time, let me summarize 2 key points. First, the plan would cut military spending by at least half and withdraw U.S. troops from overseas. Let me give you the numbers. We have 1.3 million active duty troops, another 865,000 reserves, and another 680,000 civilian employees. Cutting spending by at least half would put at least 1 million military personnel out of work. And also, do we really think withdrawing troops from South Korea or the Middle East is a good idea? Second, the plan would require the eventual elimination of all fossil fuels and even nuclear power. Natural gas produces 32% of America's energy. Oil and liquid natural gas produces an additional 28%. Coal provides nearly 18%, and nuclear power produces another 10%. In about a decade, we're supposed to replace 88% of America's current energy sources. Americans might also want to examine the history of the New Deal. Jonah Goldberg reminds us that FDR campaigned to fight the Great Depression with industrial policies and a militarized workforce. The New Deal then, and certainly the Green New Deal now, would have to increase government power over people and their liberties. Some politicians might like the sound of a Green New Deal, but I can assure you that you wouldn't like what these policies would do to you and your lifestyle. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined in studio by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And over the phone, we've got Sean McDowell that's been talking to us a little bit about Gen Z. So, Sean, you were talking about how they're digital natives, how really there's just this familiarity with technology that's becoming a part of them, and then talked a little bit about the loneliness piece that's a part of that as well. And so I couldn't help but think about Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, or Reclaiming Conversations, rather, and this idea of being alone together. Now, I think you made a great delineation at the beginning of there's really a lot of positives towards this technology. There's a lot of great things that's happening. Like I'm originally from Tennessee, and so I get a chance to FaceTime with my niece once a week. I get a chance just to get on Amazon really quickly and buy some gifts that can make sure that they get to the most perfect niece in the entire world. But there's also some detriments as well to just being so, with technology just being so familiar and being a part of the norm. And so help our audience to be able to better understand what are some of those detriments, some of those deficiencies, especially for individuals that are operating in and around or responsible for Gen Zs, and they see this technology that's at play.
Well, I think one of the most important things we have to do is just teach our kids to have appropriate boundaries when it comes to technology. Mm-hmm. I think, as it was stated earlier, kids do want relationships. And interestingly enough, I'm working on a book on Gen Z right now and have found significant research that Gen Zers actually want their parents to give them appropriate boundaries, what they look at, how they look at it, because boundaries kind of indicate love and concern. Now, that doesn't mean kids won't fight back, but deep inside they do want some boundaries. One way I did this with my son is he wanted a cell phone. All his friends had smartphones, probably at 12 years old. We told our son originally the soonest he would need it is a freshman in high school. I mean, Bill Gates and a lot of these other people said, do not give kids smartphones younger. Yeah. Well, we made an exception if he had his grades up and a whole bunch of other things we're working on that we consider the 13-week boundaries. He didn't get it until 14 and a half. And I would never go back and change that. It's one of the smartest things that we've done with our kids. And I think one reason parents give their kids smartphones is they're tired of fighting the battles, and it's easier to just give in and give it to them. I think that's a colossal mistake. I view giving my son a cell phone as an opportunity to require first that he develops certain social skills, certain responsibility, certain respect for us. And then when he shows that, he can get a phone. And then he's failed after he's gotten it, and we bounce back and discuss it. It's an ongoing process. Mm-hmm. One thing for parents, youth pastors, anybody, is to think through what are appropriate, healthy boundaries, and for the sake of kids, hold them to it in the context of relationships.
Yeah, I think that's such a great word. I mean, I even think about, for me growing up, the technology was probably one of the primary ways that my parents would discipline me was through taking away television, right? And so this is just another one of those opportunities because it was a reward type of thing. I wanted to be able to watch TV. I didn't get a chance to watch a lot of TV growing up. I got to watch it from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock at night when they were in the room. And this is so it seems as though they're not completely getting rid of television, even though there was research out that indicates some of what technology or what television was doing to us. But they did moderate that use of technology at the time, TV, but now with smartphones. It seems like that's just a logical next step in this next generation.
I think it makes perfect sense, but it's also not just as a means of discipline. Mm-hmm. Kids want smartphones.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity, like driving. My parents would tell me, you can't just get a car when you're 16. My dad would call it a death machine, which was just way over the top, but it stuck with me. The point was, you will get a car. 16 is necessary but not sufficient. When I think you're responsible to handle a car because lives are at stake, when you can care for this, as Ben Parker said of Spider-Man, with power comes great responsibility. So we should look at cell phones and say, here is an opportunity. Kids want this. Let's build in up front certain things that's required for them to develop and a maturity that they show relationally, spiritually, emotionally, morally. And then this is a reward that comes with it. It's a privilege. It's a responsibility that they are. I think if more parents would just view it this way, we could fix most of the problem, technologically speaking.
I think that's such a great perspective to have. I myself, Sean, am a young mom. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old, so they're still really little. But I feel like I need your advice now before we really get into all of this. How do you suggest someone like with young kids like me start to navigate this terrain, not just with the cell phone, but I think, don't schools have tablets and laptops? Everything is just a screen these days. Is there any advice you would have for young parents like me?
Well, I would just say 2 things. Number one, if your school has them, go find out what they are, what their protections are on it, and find that out quickly and ahead of time and make sure that those kind of safeguards are there. Second, limit the amount of technological use. We do that in our family, and we don't always do it perfectly. I don't want to pretend I got it figured out, but we have limits, the amount of time that kids use it. We have limits on where they use it, like it's not at the dinner table. It's not in the car unless it's a long trip. We might make an exception. And then third, just start talking to kids early, especially about some of the dangers on the internet, things like pornography. Talk to kids early. And the other thing is find ways to model it in your own life. Kids are watching. The other day I got my son using his smartphone. 2 minutes later, he's like, Dad, you were getting on me, and now you're doing it. I was like, oh, man, a 14-year-old is calling me out. But they're watching. Yeah. So model, talk with them. Our kids don't use technology unless they're in the front room and we can see the screen on it. So we just kind of thought through some practical ways like this that are helpful, but it's not foolproof. Your kids' friends will have smartphones that eventually will show them. We can't keep our kids in a box away from the things they'll see today. So
that's what I want to do, though.
I know. It's so hard, especially when they're the age of your kids. It's like they're so innocent and cute.
I know.
But that's when you start as young.
So Sean, you're at a university, and so obviously universities, you're trying to train and cognitively form and help poke and prod towards certain misconceptions that are available in the mind, and really just try to educate individuals. And one of the primary ways that that's done is through reading. And one of the things that I'm so interested in right now is how technology is changing just even the way we interact with text, the way we form arguments. Help our listeners better understand that what technology is doing to even the way we process information through the screen right now.
Well, this is a great question. There's a new book out I'm just starting to work through called What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains, and it's called The Shallows. Mm-hmm. And essentially he's arguing that we don't even realize how looking at a screen physically shapes the structure of our brain and creates certain pathways that we naturally operate down. And it actually physically prevents us because the way information is delivered on a screen, and it's so easy to jump from one to the next rather than in a linear fashion, it doesn't destroy, but it damages our ability to be focused and intent and follow a rational argument over time rather than just be distracted. So there's actually brain research that's coming out. I think the other thing the internet does is because there's so much information out there, it creates a sense of skepticism. Mm-hmm. A lot of Gen Z thinks, gosh, I can always Google somebody who disagrees with you. Can I really know that anything is actually true? Mm. That's a really important assumption, that if we don't talk about, okay, what is truth? Why is truth important? How do we know it? What's a good way of finding it? If we don't help this generation process that, man, they'll say Christianity's true, but in the back of their mind, they'll think, well, it works for me. But they won't have deep convictions that they really know it's true and why they know it's true.
Wow. Okay, so Sean, we're about to have to jump off air, but before you leave, I'd love to tell our audience, I'm itching right now. When's this book coming out? I need to read this now.
Oh, gosh, it comes out in April.
Okay.
So I don't even know if people can pre-order it yet. We are finishing up all the marketing right now, but It's simply called So the Next Generation Will Know. And it's with David C. Cook.
Okay.
And I'm so excited about it. It's going to be a practical tool to teach worldview to this digitally focused generation.
That's so great. Well, Sean, thank you so much for joining us. And for our listeners, you can go on to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, to find out ways that you can continue to interact with Sean, may it be through his website, his Twitter, his Facebook, etc. All that is available on the Point of View website. But we have got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to have more on the State of the Union address that happened last night. Specifically, we're going to hone in on two really central, I guess I'll go with three really central issues on the State of the Union, specifically the response from both the left and the right, the issue of abortion that President Trump so clearly communicated last night, and then three, the immigration issue that continued to come up over and over. And then we'll also be taking some of your phone calls, as always. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we will be back, though, right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us. We were just on the phone with Sean McDowell talking a little bit about his new book that will be coming out on Gen Z, this intriguing new generation that's stealing the spotlight from us, Chelsey. They're trying to take away the spotlight. And
they
you know
can
what?
steal it.
I'm kind of tired of talking about millennials.
Yeah, get us out of the spotlight a little bit.
I kind of want to be a grown-up. Toys R Us. I don't want to be a Toys R Us kid anymore. I want to operate without
Rest in peace, Toys R Us.
Yeah. So maybe they can start getting subject to unending surveys and news write-up and think pieces, etc. And so we're so grateful for him, and so for some of the research that's coming out and that he's doing in the book that he's writing. You can find out more information about that on our website, www.pointofview.net. But then we're also going to transition and talk a little bit about, there was this speech that happened last night. I don't know if you caught it or not. I think it's called like the Union State or something like that, State of the Union Address or something along those lines. It happened last night. President Trump, after a delay from the government shutdown, gave the State of the Union address last night. And to say that it was received with mixed emotions might be the understatement of the year. I heard certain individuals on the conservative right side that was saying that was one of his best performances that he ever had. He was in his natural element, where the pomp and circumstance of the day was just placed right to his strengths. And then others, if you were watching on TV, you saw certain individuals that were sitting on their hands, that were smirking with their faces, that were just very uncomfortable and wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of how frustrated and negatively they thought of President Trump. And so, Chelsey, your initial thoughts as to the State of the Union?
I mean, truthfully, I expected nothing less than a bipartisan response to this speech. But I'm such a sucker for a good old patriotic pomp and circumstance situation. I love it. I absolutely love it. He is absolutely in his element. And he's getting to do what he loves best, which is speaking directly to the American people. He truly historically won the election by eliminating the middleman. That's what the New York Times article said at the time. Was he's just very good at speaking directly to our country. And that's what last night was. I think he was what I expected. He was strong on issues, self-aggrandizing at times.
Goodness, yeah.
But also I thought he was, in a pleasant way, far more unifying in his rhetoric than I expected. I really loved when he spoke specifically about a victory really isn't a victory for this party. It's a victory for our country as a whole. And I think that's really what our country desperately needs and wants. And it's surprising we do meet in the middle on a lot of issues. I think everyone sees where people disalign, but the truth is, when it comes to things like job creation and the economy and really strong national security, there are a lot of issues that really every American can get on board with. I think there was a 74% even support rate for his stance on immigration and his ideas there, which is incredible when you think about it. Yeah. So I was very pleasantly surprised with his speech, and not surprised at all with the Democrat response.
So that was the thing that was kind of frustrating to me. One is that again, we're not historically ignorant. Like, I've always known there's always been a partisan level to State of the Union addresses. There's always been one side will stand up and cheer for whoever's party is in power more than the other side. But it seemed as though it was much more divisive this year than it has been in previous years. And the example that I referenced in the first hour during the show is during the job numbers, when he was touting some of the job growth that's happened and just the economic expansion and the explosion that's been happening relative to just some of those numbers. And what was so frustrating is that when you saw Republicans obviously were standing up and cheering some of these numbers, it was very frustrating and discouraging to see Democrats not even being able to recognize an achievement. And again, like, I understand that there's certain party issues and data points that certain parties look to as to this is something we can celebrate. But traditionally, job growth has been something that impacts not only Republicans, but also Democrats as well. And when Democrats weren't standing up and cheering for that and various other issues, I was just very discouraged by it. I thought it was also very telling.
Right. I mean, it reminds me of high school drama, right? I mean, really, that's the only reason.
Don't bring me back to high school. I'm about to get a swirly. I can feel it.
The only reason to not cheer for employment rates being on the rise and unemployment rates being at historical lows in our economy is for political reasons and expediency. Oh, yeah. And I think that that's a bad move. It's a bad look. Nobody likes a grouchy loser, and that's what the Democrats have been. Yeah. So I think it's going to backfire on them really strategically. But we saw that last year as well. Don't forget when he talked about Black unemployment rate being at a historic low. They couldn't even cheer for that. That's frustrating. We should all be for high employment rates in our country. They did, to give them credit where credit's due, they did cheer for when he spoke about there being, a higher percentage of women elected to Congress. There was a cheer for that on a bipartisan level. So that was really good to see.
Yeah. And so I've always known that there's those divisive issues, but then there's also some news that broke out of it as well. We heard news that President Trump is going to have another summit with Kim Jong-un out of North Korea, which I think is, again, just one of those things that I want to celebrate, the fact that we're having these conversations with, but also one of the things that I'm very, there's a lot of tepidness inside of me, just because probably one of the greatest assets of being president is to be able to give individuals your time. And so I always am a little hesitant, but I think in this particular instance, it's probably good to do more talking than less with North Korea. But I think one of the things that I think especially conservatives can very much cheer about is just how clear the president offered up a stance on pro-life issue. And so we've got a clip that I want to play for you, but just to help us understand what you'll hear, there's a piece of it that is the policy-oriented side where the president is so clear on his pro-life stance, but then there's also this theological component to the remarks as well, just bearing the image of God and fighting for and being a voice for those who are voiceless that I hadn't heard in a president in quite a while. And so we wanted to play that. We're going to roll that clip now. Oh, actually, we're not going to roll that clip because we're so excited about what this is. And so Chelsey, this was super encouraging just to hear a president that has been, that one, there was, again, just being very honest, had great trepidation going into the presidency just because we known he had in previous life had been pro-choice. But he's turned out to be one of the most pro-life presidents and administrations that we've seen in a long time.
Absolutely. Credit where credit is due on these issues, because I know so many conservatives who just, and myself included, were flat out fearful about the unknown quality of how he felt about the pro-life issue. He was not really seen to be a social conservative when we elected him. We weren't sure the jury was still going to be out, but we knew at the very least he had committed to appointing conservative justices. And so for so many of us, that was the sole reason we voted for President Trump was, in the hopes on the pro-life front that we would really begin to see a sea change. And that has definitively happened. I think Vice President Pence had an op-ed come out last week talking about all of the steps that the president has made on the pro-life front and how really, I think historically we've never had more of a pro-life president on policy on paper. Even if he never even said a word about these issues last night, when it comes to putting pen to paper, he's doing the right stride. So the fact that he was so definitive and came out so strong, I was just excited. I think that we're winning on the pro-life issue as a culture. I think more than ever, you're seeing the last remnants of a dead fight on the other side for being pro-abortion. And I think that we're really taking the last strides necessary to win on these issues. It was a call to Congress to action. It was a call to the American people, and it was really a call to humanity, I think.
Yeah, because right now we're in the company of countries like North Korea and Vietnam when it comes to our abortion laws that are on the place right now.
Barbaric.
And I think one of the things that's so interesting is kind of what you said. If you only paid attention, and again, I'm not an individual that likes to paint the mainstream media because I think it's a very ambiguous term. I think there's just a variety of media companies.
We won't get into that.
I know. This is a little horse that we can talk about. So but when you look across certain media companies, it seems as though there's not as much attention that's paid to the abortion issue as you would hear traditionally from very much not necessarily media companies, but much more opinion journalism than it would be simply objective journalism. And one of the things that I think has been so clear right now, even though we're not seeing it played out in the media, is the fact that One, we're seeing a decrease in the number of abortions that are performed. It's I think for the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen a decrease in the number of abortions that have been performed.
But more than that, it's half of the abortions that were occurring in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really look over time,
we are seeing drastic numbers of individuals that are choosing life instead of choosing to get an abortion. One. And then two, we're seeing public polling that's indicating that more and more individuals are choosing to be pro-life more than pro-choice, which I think is a very good thing. And so it's a reminder, especially as a Christian, to be mindful of the fact that appearances can be deceiving. What looks like defeat on a cross can turn into victory 3 days later.
Right, and should be encouraging to so many Christian voters that I know think it's a lost cause. Well, I can't vote based on that issue because it's just going to be a gridlock. That's not true.
Yeah, and especially on the state level. I cannot stress enough, especially on the state level where there's an opportunity to put some real significant measures at a very local level. We've got to take a break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about the State of the Union right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You may often hear me say that the First Amendment requires government agencies to be neutral towards private religious speech. But what does that mean? Some take the position that when the speech of a private person or organization enters the public forum, the government must ensure that all speech within such a forum be neutral, censored, and scrubbed of any religious content. But that is not neutrality, and when a government does that, it violates the First Amendment. Neutrality actually means that the government will neither favor nor disfavor particular viewpoints expressed in speech. It means that the government will not promote a particular point of view nor censor it. It means that government respects the speech of its citizens, allowing the exchange of ideas through divergent viewpoints, even those viewpoints with which those sitting in government may disagree. So if a school district has a flyer distribution program that allows local organizations to distribute information to the parents of its students, it is not required to make sure those flyers present a neutral message. The school board wouldn't be neutral if it did. As the Supreme Court has repeatedly held, quote, speech discussing otherwise permissible subjects cannot be excluded from a limited public forum on the ground that the subject is discussed from a religious viewpoint, unquote. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've decided to join us today. We've been talking a little bit about the State of the Union. We're speaking in the previous segment about President Trump and just the clear stance that he took on abortion last night, especially amidst all of this context that's been happening over the past 2 weeks relative to what happened in New York with the abortion law that was passed, illuminating the Empire State Building pink for the sake of women's choice, to what happened in Virginia just last week with Governor Northam, and just the I don't even know, disgusting comments that he made on that radio interview describing what would happen after a baby survived abortion, and then the doctors, after they've cleaned him and resuscitated her, on the table to be able to have consultation with the mother to decide whether that baby is killed, infanticide to a large degree. And to now we're finding ourselves, so we've had 2 weeks where there's just been great, large, big pieces of news relative to the pro-choice side. But then for President Trump last night to give such a clarion and clear message about abortion was just very much a sweeping wave as to in the opposite direction of what we've been hearing in the narrative that's been going on over the past couple of weeks. And so we wanted to play that for you. And so we've got that clip queued up, and we're going to run it.
There could be no greater contrast to the beautiful image of a mother holding her infant child than the chilling displays our nation saw in recent days. Lawmakers in New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb moments from birth. These are living, feeling, beautiful babies who will never get the chance to share their love and their dreams with the world. And then we had the case of the governor of Virginia, where he stated he would execute a baby after birth. To defend the dignity of every person, I am asking Congress to pass legislation to prohibit the late-term abortion of children who can feel pain in the mother's womb. Let us work together to build a culture that cherishes innocent life. And let us reaffirm a fundamental truth. All children, born and unborn, are made in the holy image of God.
And just a very clear call from our president relative to the life issue. And many wonder, and again, you can, I'll just go and say this. Many wonder as to why so many evangelicals came out in droves to support President Trump. Even though there were the indiscretions, even though there were the slip-ups, even though there was the language that was utilized, the name-calling, that issue in and of itself, this idea of being a voice for the voiceless, knowing that President Trump was not only going to champion this life issue, but also do the necessary due diligence from a legal perspective, from the court perspective, to be able to make sure that the life issue is championed. That in and of itself is a significant reason as to why so many came out in support of President Trump in 2016. And then based on some of the things that he's done thus far, you can probably expect them to come out in like manner in 2020 if I was a betting man. But we'd love to hear from you. So you can call in. We'd love to hear your comments on the State of the Union address. Do you think it was strong? Do you think you wish you would have heard certain things? Do you think you, personally, I wish I would have heard a little bit more from the foreign policy perspective, especially relative to the Syria situation right now. That's just something that's continuing to loom. I would have loved to hear more about that, but we'd love to hear from you. So what did your impressions of the State of the Union address? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can go on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What you share online, we're going to try to get to over air as well. And so we are going to jump on over to Hugh right now. Hugh is in South Carolina. Hugh, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey,
Thanks for taking my call. I resonate very well with your closing comments there. Very involved in the pro-life movement, and so I appreciate very much his stance, and I can accept, although not agree necessarily, with a lot of personal or individual foibles and shortcomings if I know that the official, in this case president, is supporting life. But as opposed to someone who supports abortion and the ability to take a child's life even up to the point of birth or even after, I mean, in that case, you don't even have the option of those people being around if you're going to kill them. So, but anyway, there's two other things I'd like to say as well. I wish he had not said anything about the investigation, because I think we all know that there are times whenever appropriate investigations, or should I say investigations, are appropriate. And his general statement, although we probably all know what he was focusing on, his general statement seemed to indicate that investigations aren't appropriate. I wish he hadn't said that. But the other thing that I'm very glad also he focused on was the fact that many people, leaders in that house, or in that, in the house or chamber there, as well as people who can afford it, live across the country, even some people who aren't necessarily affluent, but they live in walled and gated communities. And I appreciate the fact that he pointed that out, and that walls do work to some degree. They're not 100% proof. But how many of us, most of us live in walled houses, and if we have walls or gates or fences around us, how many of us would not consider it an emergency if someone were scaling our walls, breaking down our gates, or breaking our windows, coming into our homes, and his primary responsibility is the defense of our country. I heard for the first time, I heard part of your first hour program, and I do not understand how we cannot see that there is a defense issue when it comes to the security of our country and the inability to control our borders, keep out undesirables, point them to the points of entry for screening. And by the way, how many of these people who say that most of the drugs come in, at the points of control, do they know how many drugs come in at the other points between these points of control? If they do, what's their source of information? And there are programs that are available that people can watch about the interdiction that is taking place by border control of tons and tons of drugs. Of course, there are the other matters that you made reference to.
Yeah, we're talking about human trafficking there. The drugs is upwards of $47 billion. I mean, there's just so much that's going on right now that's crossing the border. And it's just, again, I'm hesitant to call it an emergency right now, because I think an emergency is directly tied to the ability for Congress to be able to act. And right now, I think Congress has the opportunity and also the time. It's not under a time constraint to act. So I'll be interested to hear, I'll be interested to see what actually constitutes an emergency and President Trump's next steps relative to the border wall. But we have got to take a break right now. But again, we're going to be taking some of your questions and comments. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can go on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And you'll see the live video box. And then right underneath that, you can leave a comment of my face that's moving around right now. And so just leave a comment there. But we've got to take a break. And when we come back from the break, more on the State of the Union, taking your phone calls and impressions. We'll be back right after this.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We are so grateful. And this moving into hour 3 now, Chelsey. Hour 3. Sometimes I can feel the weight of this. I feel like I'm back in my marathon running days, and it just takes a little bit more out
I
of me.
would not know what that feels like.
But know this: the corny jokes are still available. Know this: the heart is still going. So I hope you're ready for this.
All right.
Making our way into hour 3, talking about the State of the Union. We've had quite a show today. We had during the first hour we gave a little bit of talk to the State of the Union. Second hour we had Josh McDowell on that was talking to us a little bit about Generation Z, this coming generation that's coming, and he's also got a book that's out that will be coming out in March or April, and so you can find out more information on that book at our website, pointofview.net. And then kind of in the last part of the hour, we started taking some of your phone calls as to what you thought about the President's State of the Union address. And so if you were paying attention last night or got a chance to catch it, there's certain themes that continued to come up. The desire for unity among the Republican constituency, given voice by the president. Very much a desire to continue conversations with North Korea, especially announcing that there's a new summit that will be coming up at the end of the month. Gave attention, a large part, to some of the great things that are happening relative to the job growth numbers and some of the economic numbers, which is, I think, something that all of us can cheer toward. And so there was a lot of good things that were happening.
All of us or half of us?
Half of us, I guess I would say. Half of us were paying attention to. And so we wanted to hear what you thought of the speech last night, and then some of the things that you thought were really good that he mentioned, or maybe some of the things that you wish you would have heard from. Chelsey, I know one of the things that I wish I would have heard of from, and I'd be interested on your perspective on this as well. I wish I would have heard more about the rationale and maybe a little bit of the long-term vision for Syria or Afghanistan, Syria, that situation that continues to go on over there. I mean, Afghanistan has been a part of our country. It's been a part of really has been part of our national dialogue over the past 18 years that we've been in service there. Had anywhere from at least 7,000 troops over there, and we've just lost a lot of individuals. We heard 2 days ago how ISIS is now picking up steam and adding upwards of 50 people a day to their ranks. And so I would have liked to have heard more, especially in just knowing that they have President Trump looks to be deciding to pull out of certain of these areas. And so I would have loved to have heard more on that. But I did love how he doubled down on that abortion issue. I loved how he gave a very clarion and clear call as to the pro-life issue. So I'm throwing it to you, Chelsey, now. Is there something that you would have liked to have heard more of from the president last night?
Well, I'm always going to give a plug for the judicial nomination side, because I think we're at such a stalemate. I mean, we have nominees who've been waiting upwards of a year and a half now. We have more vacancies now than when Trump originally came into office.
No way. Wow.
And they were already a historical amount of vacancies. So really, there's kind of a judicial crisis on our hands, not to call foul and say, oh, this is a national emergency. But we have courts that aren't staffed, that are understaffed, cases that are waiting in stagnant dockets, with people seeking resolutions in the court systems they just don't have access to. And I think that it's time for him to fill the seats and really push the Senate to push them through. And that's a call to Republican senators as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm always cognizant of. I think we're living in a world in which we place a lot of blame and we also give a lot of praise to the president, when in reality, I think we place way too much blame on the president for a lot of the things that Congress should be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's too easy to give President Trump attention, when in reality, there's a lot of great work that's been happening because of the Congress as well.
Right. Well, what I was saying was that it was his turn to call out.
Oh, yeah.
While he was there in their house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And let them know, like, he has nominated an unprecedented amount of nominations as fast as possible. He's put a great priority on it, but it's time for them to be confirmed.
Yeah,
they're sitting there waiting.
Cocaine Mitch is doing the job, but Cocaine Mitch can do. I'm just kidding. That's one of the phrases that's given to him. But nevertheless,
I did not know that.
We probably shouldn't have mentioned that. But we're going to go to callers right now, and so we are going to take. We've got Randy on the phone right now. Randy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Randy, what's your point of view?
Well, I wanted to thank you for bringing these subjects up today and talking about the president's call to the nation. I was so happy with his stance, his strong stance on the abortion issue, especially partial abortion, and calling that out and really putting a true light to that once again.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially in light, I don't know if you felt this way, Randy. Over the past 2 weeks, we've continued to hear such distressing news relative to the life issue out of New York 2 weeks ago, and then out of Virginia this past week. It was great to hear. It was great to hear a very change in direction relative to the national conversation on the abortion issue that I thought President Trump did such a tremendous job on.
Completely concur.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Randy. I appreciate your phone call. Let's jump on over to Andrea right now in North Carolina. Andrea, are you there?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to hear him address that issue, the abortion issue, in light of what happened in New York that you just spoke about. We have a coastal pregnancy care center, as they do all over the nation, and I'm not sure where people are on this issue, but he's brought it to light. And I think this, you would agree, even as a millennial, because I'm so much older than you, but you would agree that this, what do they call it, reproductive health care thing in New York is absolutely a slap in the face of the pro-life movement and children and the sacredness of life, the sacredness of marriage, the sacredness. And he spoke to it at the State of the Union. I appreciate that. And right now we got a fundraiser coming up March 7th in Moorhead, and, of course, a lot of places all over the nation. So it's a timely, would you agree, timely thing for him to do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I thought, again, Andrew, I completely agree with you. I think it was a nice change in the conversation that we've continued to hear in the national discourse about. It just seemed as though that if you were only paying attention to the headlines right now, you would think what was happening in New York 2 weeks ago to what's happened in Virginia this past week, you would think that we would be just this nation that just gave in to its desires and were willing to allow abortion to just be so prevalent. But again, our president gave a very strong voice. And I think one of the things that we can be encouraged by, Chelsey, is the fact that he was on the majority side on this. The majority of Americans are supportive of the unborn in the womb of the mother.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that we've talked about this before, but that we need to be encouraged. We're winning this battle. The pro-life movement is winning hearts and minds. It's a human issue at its core. And we have, I think it's 50% of abortions now than there were in 1980s.
Yeah.
It's half of what it used to be with the increases in technology and medical knowledge and understanding about this issue. I think that the other side and what we saw in New York and Virginia are the last remnants of a dying, movement. Yeah. That the abortion movement is really going to be gone. Hopefully in my lifetime. I would love to see that. And I'm really, really proud of our president for taking the stand that he took when we genuinely were uncertain as to where he would go with this issue when we elected him. Yeah. We're excited. I'm excited by this.
Yeah, as am I. And so we've got to go to a break right now. And so when we come back from the break, we'll continue talking about the State of the Union address. We'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
One of the hot ideas in the progressive world is the Green New Deal. It's a term reminiscent of FDR's New Deal of the 1930s, but is even bolder in its approach. For the next year or so, we will hear Democratic candidates talk about it and perhaps even include it in the 2020 Democratic platform. If people take a moment to sit down and read it, they would reject it, but since most of us don't have the time, let me summarize 2 key points. First, the plan would cut military spending by at least half and withdraw U.S. troops from overseas. Let me give you the numbers. We have 1.3 million active duty troops, another 865,000 reserves, and another 680,000 civilian employees. Cutting spending by at least half would put at least 1 million military personnel out of work. And also, do we really think withdrawing troops from South Korea or the Middle East is a good idea? Second, the plan would require the eventual elimination of all fossil fuels and even nuclear power. Natural gas produces 32% of America's energy. Oil and liquid natural gas produces an additional 28%. Coal provides nearly 18%, and nuclear power produces another 10%. In about a decade, we're supposed to replace 88% of America's current energy sources. Americans might also want to examine the history of the New Deal. Jonah Goldberg reminds us that FDR campaigned to fight the Great Depression with industrial policies and a militarized workforce. The New Deal then, and certainly the Green New Deal now, would have to increase government power over people and their liberties. Some politicians might like the sound of a Green New Deal, but I can assure you that you wouldn't like what these policies would do to you and your lifestyle. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have joined us. We have been talking a little bit about the State of the Union address. So fascinating. There was really 2 issues that kind of percolated up to the top of the State of the Union that many individuals are talking about right now. And one of those issues would be the abortion issue, where our president was so clear on. But then also there was quite a few comments about the wall. And so we'd love to hear from you as to what you thought of the State of the Union address. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we're going to take one of those comments right now, or take one of those phone calls about the wall and President Trump's comments last night at the State of the Union address. We've got Art in California right now. Art, are you there?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Kirby. I'm here.
Hey, Art, what's your point of view?
Sorry, you're not Kirby.
I know. You're throwing big rocks at Kirby right now to say that I'm like Kirby. Man, if only I could be half the man he is.
But anyway, I loved what Trump said last night about the wall. I totally agree. And also, I love it how he brings it out to life, because he shows people who have been otherwise without a wall, have been paying the price for no wall, who have lost family members due to illegal aliens, who have, criminals who have come over and murdered some citizens in our country. And I just love how he brings people there to show, the real life people. And a lot of times when people hear about the wall or they hear about illegal aliens, right away they think he's talking about Hispanics, Mexicans. And he's not, because the wall is, the border, without any kind of control, these anybody to go through. And I watched a program called, I don't know if you ever heard these guys, Judicial Watch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they did a piece on the border control. And they showed how much criminal activity comes through on a daily basis through that border.
Yeah.
And there is nothing that's being done right now because it's so hard to control it. The criminals that come in, and some of them are even paying off, officials that are looking the other way. But this guy, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's also been an investigator for the military at one time. And so now he's doing investigating for Judicial Watch. But anyway, I just thought it was great how President Trump made it come to life when he brought people out who were affected by the misuse of, or not use of any kind of border control.
Yeah, I think that's one of my greatest concerns, and I'd echo you in that, in the sense that there's one number I heard was, and this was a conservative number, $47 billion worth of illegal drugs crosses the border last year.
Yeah.
And it's just, right. There's a significant that. And then you think about our life expectancy has gone down for the past 3 years. And a large part of that's tied to the opioid epidemic. You heard the big breaking news that happened last week on Friday about how federal officials found these smugglers and uncovered all this fentanyl that they were trying to bring across. And so I am keenly aware of the drug issue and the implications from a social health perspective, but also just the other ramifications and unintended consequences that comes from that. And so I'd like to see there be greater protection down at the border. And I think Trump as well, President Trump, I want to give respect where respect is due, where President Trump is well within his means to be able to highlight this particular issue. One of the things that I'm interested in, and thank you so much for your call, Art, one of the things that I'm interested in, Chelsey, is whether what's happening down at the border right now constitutes a national emergency. And so we've got a clip that we're going to play for you because that was one of the things that continues to loom in the background right now. Because if you will remember, the first government shutdown was centered on the idea of border wall funding. President Trump wants $5.7 billion worth of border wall funding. The Democrats weren't willing to give him the $5.7 billion. Therefore, the government got shut down for 35 days. And so now we find ourselves with entertaining the idea in the background is President Trump going to declare a national emergency so he can reappropriate funds in order to be able to fund the border wall? You heard remnants of that last night. And so we're going to play the first clip that gives you just a little hint subliminally how President Trump is trying to do so.
Now, Republicans and Democrats must join forces again to confront an urgent national crisis. Congress has 10 days left to pass a bill that will fund our government, protect our homeland, and secure our very dangerous southern border. Now is the time for Congress to show the world that America is committed to ending illegal immigration and putting the ruthless coyotes, cartels, drug dealers, and human traffickers out of business.
And again, President Trump is trying to gin up this idea of the national emergency. And you saw a little bit of it in those comments talking about the dire situation that we have there. In the second clip that we're going to play, it's going to bring up specifically the caravan situation. And so we've got the second clip now.
As we speak, large organized caravans are on the march to the United States. We have just heard that Mexican cities, in order to remove the illegal immigrants from their communities, are getting trucks and buses to bring them up to our country in areas where there is little border protection. I have ordered another 3,750 troops to our southern border to prepare for this tremendous onslaught. This is a moral issue. The lawless state of our southern border is a threat to the safety, security, and financial well-being of all America. We have a moral duty to create an immigration system that protects the lives and jobs of our citizens. This includes our obligation to the millions of immigrants living here today who followed the rules and respected our laws. Legal immigrants enrich our nation and strengthen our society in countless ways.
Just a very interesting situation that we find ourselves in right now, Chelsey, where we're thinking through, does President Trump, one, have the capacity and the agency to be able, is he within his constitutional means, is probably the better way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
Within his constitutional means, one, is this situation a national emergency? Two, to merit him reappropriating funds in order to go to the border wall? Or can those funds only be authorized and deployed by first getting confirmation through Congress right now?
Those are some heavy-hitting legal questions, and I am not an expert, but based on my very, very preliminary assessment, it's actually statutory provisions based out of a statute of 1976, which really just triggers all these other national emergency statutes, and he has to specify which one's going to apply and submit it to Congress through federal regulations. And essentially, it's been done 56 times, I think, since 1976. So this is by no means, I mean, that's more than one a year. And they can be renewed annually. For instance, President Bush declared a state of national emergency after September 11th, and it has been annually renewed since. There's been influenza states of emergencies. There was a state of emergency by HHS for Obamacare right before that decision was rendered. So it's something that does happen frequently, and whether this specific instance applies or not, I'm not sure. I can't help but think if he had really solid legal backing on this, that he would have done it already. But regardless, he cannot redirect the power of the purse. That's Congress's job. Appropriate funds to the wall. What would have to happen is it would have to be military funds diverted to the wall, which means the Army Corps of Engineers would need to be the ones to build it, and he would have to. It would obviously be constitutionally challenged, I'm sure, by his opponents, and it would have to withstand that scrutiny. That is this really a military effort and a protective measure? And I don't think it's really a bridge too far to declare it one with the statistics you spouted off earlier. Yeah,
and so I think that would be the interesting thing is, one, I'm always aware, like from kind of some of the definitions that we put forward, a national emergency is a situation beyond the ordinary which threatens the health or safety of citizens which cannot be properly addressed by the use of other laws. So there's extent where there's time constraints on there. And then also the safety. I think those are kind of two questions that I've got looming in the back of my mind. But then I'm also aware of what the examples you set in the present inevitably will ripple forth into the future for future administrations, whether they are Republican or Democrat. And I want to be aware of that at the very least. But we've got to take a break, and so we'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212 or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us. We have been talking about the State of the Union address. And Chelsey, I've decided we're going to take a trip around the country.
Okay.
And specifically, we're going to take a trip around the country through phone calls. And so we're going to start taking some phone calls right now. And so you can be sure to call in right now, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And let's go ahead. Let's start here in the homeland of Texas, shall we? And so we've got Ann in Texas right now on, if I can click, and I can't click on it right now. So we'll go to Sam. Actually, I can't click on anything. Oh, okay. So we're having, we'll go with line 6 right now. So we've got technical difficulties. I know how to use Facebook really well, but outside of Facebook and the internet and the Googles, I'm kind of oblivious right now. And so we'll have Ann on line 6 right now. Maybe we won't have Ann on line 6. We're going to delay this road trip. Okay, so Ann on line 6 right now. No, we don't. So do you want to pretend to be Ann on line 6 right now? And she wanted to comment how wonderful the speech was, which I think I can echo.
I agree with that. We were talking about this earlier, though, that I'm such a sucker for patriotism and pomp and circumstance.
You are.
I love it, love it, love it. And so I love the State of the Union address. It's something I look forward to every year, even though I know it's like more of a ceremonial. But as an Aggie, I think we just like our traditions. And so it's a great tradition. I thought he was very unifying, which I wasn't quite expecting. I wasn't sure what to expect other than I knew there would be some form of self-aggrandizement.
Yeah.
And that he would have a very strong vocal speech about his policies, which of course he did, but he was not, he could have been divisive. He could have been really strong for the Republicans, but I thought he was really strong, frankly, for wanting unification in America. And, I loved the part where he said, victory is not victory for one party. It's for our country as a whole. And I think that that's so true. And for him to be able to say that after how polarizing the last 2 years have been and how partisan specifically they've been, I really did appreciate that tone.
Yeah, I think that because there were some memorable lines. We'll go ahead and say there were quite a few memorable lines that I want to bring up amongst us. And so I think
all you have to do is go to his Instagram where he's posted his lines.
He pretty much gave quite a bit. And so I think one of the things that I was really interested in, because I was shocked by it, because a lot of people have told him, I think naturally the Mueller investigation right now is something that weighs pretty heavily upon the American populace. I think we're pretty exhausted by that. And so we really didn't hear too much about Mueller in this, but there was a line that is giving, that's gone, we'll say that it's generated a lot of attention. And specifically the line is, if there's going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation. If it just doesn't work that way. And so there are many that were, I would say on Twitter, where I was kind of primarily following for very quick commentary on it, is that the idea that there can be both. You can do an investigation as well as there can be war that's going on. And I just thought it was an interesting turn of phrase. I like the line, the rhyming nature of it, but I didn't think it to be false. But I will say, though, that the Mueller investigation is becoming very tiresome right now, just because we're just continually hearing about every drop that pours out from it.
Right. And to the extent that it undermines not only our own intelligence agencies and abilities, and we should have answers by now, frankly. To the extent it undermines our own intelligence agencies and democracy abroad, I do think that I understand if that's what he meant.
Yeah.
That wouldn't necessarily be a bridge too far. To really, the Democrats' big mantra is that somehow Russian agents and involvement in our election were enough to undermine an entire democratic election in the United States. That's a huge allegation, and one that I'm not willing to really give them that power and authority. And so to the extent that it undermines democracy, that's absolutely true. If it's a frivolous investigation, but of course it is well within the rights of Congress to investigate the executive. And, overall from a constitutional standpoint, it's too broad of brushstrokes. But look, he's taken a hit for years on this. So there's no question in my mind that that's how he genuinely feels about this.
So here's my thing. I think we've been sold a false bill of goods right now, where I have to decide whether there is merit to the investigation right now, or I have to decide whether there is nothing. This is purely a witch hunt. Blah. Like I'm of the mind that I think it's important for the American democratic process to try to understand, relative to the Russian investigation, if there was any type of influence in that. And I think from a security standpoint, it's important for us moving forward as well. We want to get to the bottom of this. And I think thus far, Mueller has done that. Now, I am very much keenly aware of the news right now. And it's very tiresome right now. We continue to hear more and more, and I can get tired from it. But I also think that for the health of the country, we don't need to draw conclusions too quickly. But I would prefer
nothing about this has been quick. We can assure you that.
I would prefer us to proceed a little bit quicker on this issue. Because, again, I think, and a part of that, I think the reason why Americans are tired is because Americans are increasingly becoming more political animals. And I think we're looking to it very much to satisfy certain needs that can't be satisfied by politics. But that's more of a sociological perspective right now.
Right. I mean, I think that I'm very glad he didn't emphasize it more than he did. And we can expect him to defend himself. If he's not going to defend himself, who will, right? So, and he's really taken a hit over this, but I was glad that it didn't get more traction because, again, I think it's a narrative that the country is tired of hearing, and it's going to start falling on deaf ears, I think, leading into the next election especially. Yeah, and I think another thing that we continued to hear quite a bit about is just some of these points that he was making towards the press of unity, the desire for unity specifically. And so we even heard that in the Democratic response with Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams being the individual that ran for the governorship in Georgia, lost to Brian Kemp. She gave the Democratic response, and what was fascinating is that she also appealed to desire for unity among both parties. But whereas for her, it was more towards unity around our ideals, for President Trump, he highlighted particular issues. And so some of those issues were criminal justice reform. Some of those issues were combating AIDS, HIV. And so it was fascinating to see that unity piece. Okay, so we're going to get back into the car and go on this road trip around the country because we think our phone lines are working right now. So let's go to line one. We got Philip right now. Philip, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm calling from Nacogdoches.
Nacogdoches, the Lumberjacks, huh?
I am an SFA Lumberjack alumni, 85.
My man, 85 was a good year. Not that I'm biased or anything, but Philip, what's your point of view?
I believe that all these social and parasocial issues such as the wall, abortion, immigration, etc., have been, you could compare his viewpoints, and they line up a lot with what JFK espoused because he was a centrist Democrat. And I believe also that Trump's viewpoints have been evolving over the years and have been influenced by the fact that he has a lot of Jewish people in his family.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Well, Philip, thank you so much. I think there is merit to your idea that, I mean, he's just a New Yorker. He's a New Yorker, and I mean, I think it's very clear that we're influenced by the people that we're around, and so he very much doubles down on that New Yorker mentality. I can tell you from a commercial real estate standpoint, one of the fascinating things when I got a chance to be around some of those circles in D.C. a few months back, I was struck by the real estate lingo and jargon that was utilized in foreign policy conversations. Because again, you run into, just like with you, and there's certain legal jargon that you just there's just a certain vocabulary that you develop and you deploy in your conversations. One of the things I was always so struck by was the idea of some of this real estate lingo and conversation that was utilized in these foreign policy circles, which again isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a very different thing. But the way some individuals will report it, it is a bad thing, one, and it shows incompetence, two, which I just don't think is the case. Well, we've always said he's a transplant from the business world into politics, which I think is one of the reasons that people were so excited about him, because he is very much different than the typical politician we've seen. But as to our callers, comment about the evolving policies we're seeing, I think to the extent his social conservative policies have progressed, I'm
so happy.
Yeah.
I thought that was such an unknown quantity about him when we were voting. And that was really, I think, something that the evangelical right was nervous about. And to see how far we've come in his pro-life stances and his religious liberty stances specifically, we've come leaps and bounds. And I would posit that on policy and position, at least what he's verbally saying, he's stronger on social conservative issues than many Republican presidents we've had in the past.
Yeah, very interesting. And so we've got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we'll continue taking phone calls. And so our cyber van is up. And so if you want to call in, we're going to make our way around. You think I'm taking this a little too far? Sorry. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. What you think about the State of the Union? We'll take your phone calls, but we'll take a break right now.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. You may often hear me say that the First Amendment requires government agencies to be neutral towards private religious speech. But what does that mean? Some take the position that when the speech of a private person or organization enters the public forum, the government must ensure that all speech within such a forum be neutral, censored and scrubbed of any religious content. But that is not neutrality, and when a government does that, it violates the First Amendment. Neutrality actually means that the government will neither favor nor disfavor particular viewpoints expressed in speech. It means that the government will not promote a particular point of view nor censor it. It means that government respects the speech of its citizens, allowing the exchange of ideas through divergent viewpoints, even those viewpoints with which those sitting in government may disagree. So if a school district has a flyer distribution program that allows local organizations to distribute information to the parents of its students, it is not required to make sure those flyers present a neutral message. The school board wouldn't be neutral if it did. As the Supreme Court has repeatedly held, quote, speech discussing otherwise permissible subjects cannot be excluded from a limited public forum on the ground that the subject is discussed from a religious viewpoint, unquote. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and I'm joined by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. We've been talking about the State of the Union address, and so we've been taking some of your phone calls as well. And so we're going to jump on over to Donna in New Hampshire right now. Donna, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Donna, what's your point of view?
I loved that speech last night.
Oh,
it was amazing.
Tell me more. What did you love so much about it?
Well, I loved how he addressed the ladies in white, which reminded me of a choir of sorts, with Nancy Pelosi being their director.
Uh-huh.
And how he engaged them, which was, I thought, was a very good thing. He didn't put them down or anything. He just said what he felt at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, go ahead.
No, ma'am, you go ahead.
Then there was the issue of abortion. I was really happy to see him address that.
Mm-hmm.
And amongst a whole bunch of other stuff. But I was reading Governor Cuomo's rebuttal online, and he's accusing President Trump of assaulting abortion rights.
Mm-hmm.
And the president's diatribe was part of the far right's escalation of its assault on women's constitutional rights. And he said he claimed to be anti-choice, and he shamelessly courts the religious right to win votes. And on and on and on he went with all this negative stuff. But I think the fact that those folks didn't stand up shouldn't be a means of discouragement, because there were so few compared to all those who did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's.
Go ahead.
That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, I was. I thought there was some great elements to the speech, Don. I completely agree with you. I think one of the things that I brought up in the previous hour is I wish I would have heard more about from foreign policy. We heard a little bit about China. We heard a little bit about North Korea. Chelsey, I did want to hear a little bit more, just because, again, we're the shining city on a hill, and I know that President Trump does have some of those tendencies to want to pull us back on the world stage to be able to take care of America first. But we still have certain troops. We still have certain commitments overseas right now that I would have loved to have heard a little bit more about. And I know you can't address everything in a State of the Union speech.
Right.
Granted.
I think he really stuck to domestic issues, but the State of the Union. I mean, I think that was his focus point, was domestic policy, economy. I understand what you're saying, but I also don't feel that he's one to really show his cards that much with his international policy in general. But yeah, I thought he was in his element.
Yeah.
This is what President Trump does best, talking to the American public about things he cares about and is passionate about. And, as far as the criticism about just pandering to the religious right, even if he was, it's the right answers. I mean, even if he knows his base, he knows the policies that we're passionate about, and he's actually been really proactive on especially the pro-life front and religious liberty fronts. He's doing a wonderful job. So there's no complaints here, and it is fun to see the president in his element instead of getting beat down constantly. It was him being able to control the narrative. It was him being able to speak for himself on his own behalf without hecklers and what we normally see in the media. So I thought it was refreshing and really casting a unifying tone.
Yeah. And you know what? Since we're in a media cyclone, we're on the last 5 minutes. I'm going to press the question with Chelsey by bringing up a radically different topic, but something that has now taken away kind of some of the wind from the State of the Union address and directs it back. Yes, America, it directs it back toward Virginia. And so if you've been following along with the news out of Virginia, last week on Wednesday, you had Governor Northam gave comments about an abortion bill that was being put forward by Delegate Tran about the third trimester abortions, and just was very graphic in his nature of describing that. Because of that, there was great calls, as there should be, on infanticide, is what he was advocating for on this radio interview. And then fast forward to just last Friday, reports broke of him in blackface or a Ku Klux Klan picture. And so then you had that, and there were more mounting calls for Governor Northam to resign. On Saturday, we find out claims about his lieutenant governor being in a sexual abuse instance about 15 years prior back that many are now claiming are false allegations. And even now, before we go on air, there is the comments that have been made. The lieutenant governor, not the lieutenant governor, the attorney general for Virginia has now come forward and said in 1980 he also donned blackface as well. And so, one, Chelsey, I think we can easily both agree that blackface is reprehensible. It's denigrating. It mars the very image of God. It's not respectful. It's not commendable. It's ungodly. It's evil. I think we both can agree on that.
Absolutely. I mean, we're the millennial generation, so for us, this was not this might be a generation gap. Yeah. Apparently everyone in the 80s in Virginia did that. Yeah. Definitely not something I've ever seen in my lifetime. I don't know, as a millennial, that's just such a reprehensible thing and so inappropriate and so demeaning and derogatory. And I know that racism, really has come a long way since the 80s, 30 years ago, but it's just hard for me to imagine what it was like. So I'm interested in, it's just maybe a cultural difference.
And so help me understand, because this is what I'm wrestling with. Does something you do when you're in college or so far back, does that merit you being forced to resign or your public career being over because of something that happened so far back?
Well, it depends what it is. Do you know what should have been a trigger to force a resignation? Talks of infanticide 2 weeks ago. That's what should have triggered a resignation first. Then when this came up, that's the discussion to be had. But the Democrats were lauding him 2 weeks ago.
And he was the moderate. He was the moderate governor. I mean, even so far as to say Bill Kristol was put forward and said he put his backing behind him over Ed Gillespie during the race.
And I don't think it's a bridge too far to say that Planned Parenthood and the founders were for ethnic cleansing and abortion predominantly affects minority groups. I mean, this is a problem for minorities and other races, and I think that it's all bad.
Yeah.
Can you just say that? It's all bad.
I think that's one of the things that I want to wrestle with, and I wish we could have spent more time on it, and maybe we'll spend more. I mean, the way that this thing is going, we're going to, it'll be more will continue to come out of Virginia, but I think it's a conversation worth having right now. The fact that we are in an age right now where there's an ability to sift through so much paper, and not only an ability to sift through so much of the past, what merits in the past public present resignations?
Well, donning a Ku Klux Klan cloak.
Yeah. And so for example,
that's indicative of at the very least massive character issues.
And this is the partisan politics at play. So when there was the Ku Klux Klan thing, well, then we also have to remember Robert Byrd, who was the late senator out of West Virginia, was a leader in the Ku Klux Klan, but he never was forced to resign in the Senate. Or you can go back to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell in the early 90s I believe it was the early 90s. There's this big picture of him right in front of a Confederate flag, and he's receiving some type of commendation award for this. And he's gone back and he's been very clear on his record about what he thinks relative to the Confederate flag and what he thinks relative to the usage of it in 2019 today. I think one of the things I'm most concerned about is we look back into the past. I know there are things that were reprehensible in the past that happened. I know the grace of God cleanses us of all wrong and evil, but I want to be very hesitant for us to exercise what's known as chronological snobbery, to look back on the past and say that we were above that or we would have done something different, because again, we're all shaped by our cultural, by the moments and the people that we're around. We've got to leave, but it's so great to be on with you, and be sure to tune in tomorrow when Kirby is back.
It wasn't long ago it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.